Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss a Telegraph piece that jumped out at me. It's not a comment piece, so presumably something the editors at the Telegraph want to push. It's an article which, on the face of it, looks like it's championing the benefits, nay, the necessity, of immigration. This sounds very strange for the Telegraph, but read from a different point of view, you can see it for what it really is. It's giving the Tories some covering fire for their attack on the state pension, because the meaning of the article is clear. If you want to screw over immigrants, you've got to screw over pensioners first. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button so you stay notified. So let's begin with the headline, as usual when we break down these articles. Britain's state pension to pass breaking point without immigration. Underneath, benefit will not survive without migration plugging Labour gaps, warns think tank. So a few things here. The first is that the article is making clear to those who can't be bothered reading the actual article that the more migration is needed to maintain the state pension. So this sounds like an article promoting the necessity of immigration, right? But this is the Telegraph. That's not what they do. And indeed it's not. When you read the article and then consider what it's saying from the point of view of like a stereotypical Tory paper reader, you realise the article is not pro-immigration. It's anti-pension. And then you recall that the Conservatives are actively talking about weakening the triple lock, means testing first, so they say. That way they can say, oh no, we still support the triple lock. Yeah, but not for everyone. No, not for everyone, but we still support the triple lock. Even though, of course, that would make it a fundamentally different policy. Then if they succeed with that, the triple lock itself will go. Then they will look at whittling down the state pension in real terms. So, how to take the article will really depend on your view of immigration and pensions, particularly the state pension. But a clue as to the real intention comes at the start of the article. So it talks about how the very first pension was worth £38 a week in today's money, but is now £221. The implication being, well, it is excessive these days, ridiculous. We used to manage on £38 a week. Of course, this is comparing the pension with over 100 years ago. Way fewer living expenses for the poorest, and the standard of living was similarly basic. And that comparison, for example, is using a form of inflation which doesn't take housing costs into account. A more realistic approach with a comparison with average incomes and then the situation in other European countries shows that our state pension is far from generous. I mean, it's not the worst, but it is in the bottom half when compared to comparable international economies. But the article is getting you ready to think of the state pension as somehow generous. And this line of argument, you think, well, that's not going to work on their elderly readers, surely. Well, a couple of things to say about that. First, if they're pitching this at well-off elderly Tory voters who own their own homes, things like that, it might. Like, what do pensioners who are financially comfortable care about? Mostly access to the healthcare that they increasingly need, right? With a media diet of how immigration is creating problems in the NHS, despite the opposite being true, it's dependent on immigration, then it might be possible to persuade these people that a hit to their state pension is worth it for better access to doctors. After all, it'll be cheaper than going private, won't it? And the Tories, aided by the Telegraph here, remember, they're not arguing for the state pension to go altogether, at least not yet. That's their long game. It's initially to get out of the triple lock policy. The second point to make is that the age breakdown of the Telegraph is a little bit weird. See, it does actually have a higher proportion of older readers compared to newspapers on average, but also a higher proportion of younger working age readers, who are the ones most susceptible to anti-immigration misinformation. There are other claims in the article as well. The first is in describing the state pension as a benefit. Now, people rankle against this. I had someone in the comments doing so recently. But it is technically true. Legally and economically, the state pension is a benefit. Like, people think they've paid into the system, so it's different, but they haven't. Like, if you take my teacher's pension, for example, I paid into that. The money went into an investment fund, and when it pays out for me, I'm getting a share of the returns that investment has made. That is not what happens with the state pension. Nobody pays into it. You pay taxes. And those taxes are immediately spent, including on the current pension population. Everything you pay into the system is spent in the next 12 months. So in literal terms, it is a benefit. But people like to distinguish it from other types of state benefit. Why? Because the media has convinced you that there is something shameful about being in receipt of benefits, that it represents a failure, and that while you are taking them, you are somehow sponging off the state. But there is zero difference between the state pension and universal credit, or indeed any other type. The only difference is your attitude towards them, an attitude which has been shaped by the Tory media. So when the Telegraph refers to the state pension immediately as a benefit, they're not doing it in a matter-of-fact sort of way because it is. They're doing it because it's time to turn their readers against it. Kemi Badenoch has sent up the distress flare, and the Tory press have come to reinforce her. Because there was also a piece in the Times attacking the triple lock, by the way, in case you thought this wasn't a coordinated effort. But back to the Telegraph article, because it's more sly about the way it's presenting its arguments. It talks about how governments have used immigration to deal with the cost of the state pension, but that it's a sticking plaster, which is also untrue. Governments haven't gone, oh, it's trouble with the state pension, let's get loads of immigrants in, because how does that work? Businesses do that. Government, I mean generations ago, sure. But governments just manage how easy the process has been for businesses who are actually the ones who want immigration. But what the Telegraph are doing here is making the claim that we only have high immigration now because governments were trying to solve the problem of paying the state pension. That it's the state pension that is the sole reason we have immigration that is higher than some people think it should be. It then says that the longer an immigrant remains in the country, the more likely they are to then have to draw on that state pension themselves in time. But this is a mathematical nonsense. First, it would be a hell of a long time, by which time the UK will have extracted more out of them than a UK citizen drawing the same pension at the same age. So it's still a net benefit to the economy and the public, the services that are paid for and staffed by immigrants. But the entire piece is full of these spurious and in some cases factually inaccurate arguments. It says that the pension has increased from 2% of GDP in the early 50s to 7% these days. You know, which is weird because they compare the value of the pension now with what it was in 1909, but they compare the load on GDP with the 1950s. It's almost like they're just looking for comparisons with whichever year favours their argument, rather than picking a reasonable average or single point of comparison. It's a mathematical conjuring trick to compare with specific years where the value of something was either historically low or historically high, depending on what they want to do. And it only fools people who aren't used to critically evaluating data, although that is almost everyone in the country, which is why news outlets do it all the time. Now, I could go through every single line pointing out what's wrong or what's unsaid about each one, but that would just take me hours. Instead, I'll finish off with one last one, which misses out the all too common elephant in many rooms. So they quote an economics researcher saying that the state pension used to depend on like this sort of increased productivity to pay for a larger retired population, but that it's not happening at the moment because we have this dwindling number of people working at the same productivity levels. But they don't say why that is, because this is recent. Almost like it's Tory Brexit related or something. Then they go on to start making the case for well-paid immigrants over lower-paid ones, which, by the way, is very much in line with the Tory immigration system. Remember, they were hailing, oh, we're going to have this points-based immigration system after Brexit, points-based. And what's it done? Because if you're arguing for well-paid immigrants to be allowed and low-paid ones not, think that through. Who's going to do the poorly paid work? That's right. There will only be British workers available for the crap jobs with this system. Now, there are a lot of aims of an article like this, and I want to explore another in a different video, or this will end up actually being a lecture series, but the overall lesson from the article is really clear. It says you cannot sustain the state pension and current policies without accepting what they call high levels of immigration. And because the Tories have already succeeded in making people think that the current levels of immigration are bad, then the only place for you to go is to accept that the state pension is unaffordable. And this is a long game. It's like Brexit in more ways than one. They took them decades to get us out of the EU. They've prepared for this one to take time too. But the Tories are already talking about failing to keep pace with an already low state pension. And the Tory media are out in force providing them ammunition. When the Tories come back, the state pension is getting both barrels, mark my words. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll see you later.